EU, the UK, all of America's Western so-called allies, they need to make an urgent reassessment of their relationship with the United States. Of course, this also means that the people of those countries in the EU and so on, they need to make a serious reevaluation of their own leaders, all of whom are just going along with America's plans, and who seem to be the only leaders left in the world who still think it's a good idea to follow Washington's orders. 60% of Europeans no longer feel that America is a reliable ally or partner. That puts EU leadership at odds with the population in this regard. Even the European Council on Foreign Relations said that America's interests and Europe's interests no longer align, particularly on trade and security issues. And of course, they're right. America has been pursuing a systematic campaign of destabilization across Europe for years, and particularly since the Ukraine war and the Russian sanctions. I've been talking about that since the beginning. Thanks to these policies, Europe is in a death spiral. Bankruptcies are at record highs, business closures, home foreclosures, companies relocating, factories shutting down. I mean, Germany is in a rapid state of deindustrialization. America is trying to pit Europe against Russia, pit the UK against Russia, which is depriving the whole continent of affordable energy, and it's prompting militarization, which they can't afford, all of which is for the benefit of American oil and gas companies and for the U.S. weapons sector. People are becoming radicalized. Extremism of all stripes is emerging. Europeans feel that their societies are more polarized than ever. Protests are taking place more frequently and are turning violent more frequently. Repression is getting worse. It's getting more severe. Terrorist attacks are increasing, particularly from far-right groups. The International Center for Counterterrorism attributes this, at least in part, to the war in Ukraine and the influx of neo-Nazis and other extremists and the flood of small arms that were supposedly being sent to Ukraine. The whole continent is sliding into a irreversible strife, and that's blatantly by American design. The U.S. is also trying to drive a wedge between Europe and China, even though Europe desperately needs Chinese investment, Chinese capital, Chinese technology, and the Chinese market for their own exports. And again, European leaders are just going along with this in defiance of their own populations and obviously against the interests of their own people, because EU leaders are subservient to Washington neocons. America always intended for the war in Ukraine to spread. They never intended for Ukraine to win. The whole point was always to accelerate Europe's destabilization, their isolation, and their deterioration. And so far, no one is doing anything whatsoever to pump the brakes. So yes, America and its so-called Western allies, the UK, the EU, are really at a make or break point. People always talk about being on the right side of history. Well, Europe needs to start making decisions on the right side of the future, because their relationship with the United States has frankly put them into an existential crisis. The fact is, BRICS is building an alternative to the old US-led world order, and Britain and the EU need to understand this. The global system of the 20th century is a relic. The balance of power no longer favors the G7, and the Global South is the only vehicle left with wheels still on it and with a working engine. And Europe needs to hitch a ride with them if they don't want Uncle Sam to drive them off a cliff, because that's where they're going now. I mean, I know it's going to be a traumatic adjustment for these Westerners, for these Europeans, accepting the fact that your so-called Western civilization and your societies are actually unsustainable, and your great American protector and benefactor is actually cannibalizing you. But on the other hand, turning to the Global South for your survival isn't really anything new. I mean, you never would have actually even been anything of significance without your imperialism and colonization of Africa and Asia. So the truth is that you've always been a dependency, and you still are. The difference is that you used to get to pretend that you weren't the dependent one, because you used to be able to just steal from the Global South in order to prop up your societies. But you've always been dependent. So there's no real change there. Just an attitude adjustment is necessary, and an acceptance of your real status vis-a-vis the Global South. You will have to humble yourselves to some degree to cooperate with BRICS. But believe me, it's better than the utter humiliation that you're going to suffer if you continue cooperating with the Americans.